Hello and welcome back. Today we have a very special episode. We're making a sword from Berserk. We're making the Beard Frost blade from Mandragorian.
Bruh.
1,000 apologies.
This episode is sponsored by Primal Games Studio and their new dark fantasy action RPG, Mandragora: Whispers of the Witch Tree. Similar to how you fine-tune your characters and abilities in this immersive game, join us as we make key decisions on how to bring this sword to life.
To start this project, the workshop had a pretty good surplus of old leaf springs, which are usually 5160 spring steel, and that should make a very good material for a blade of this size. Our goals for this project is to actually make the source material into a realistic or semi-realistic weapon. So usually, any kind of art utilizes a degree of abstraction. Think about when you try to draw someone's portrait, the drawn portrait is not quite like the actual thing that you see. And the issue is a little bit more exaggerated in anime, video games, and other media. So what happens is a sword that would be workable is animated being twice as long, 4 times the thickness, for example. So we're taking the source material that looks like it's 1.5 inches and turning it back into reality, making it narrow and a good slicer.
A lot of times in fantasy, you have the ergonomics of a weapon designed for another species, somebody who has more strength or whatever it is. In this case, we have to keep in mind that we're trying to make it for us, make it real, make a real sword out of this design. So we're going to cut some weight here and there where we can to make it a little more wieldable.
Someone can say that these fantasy weapons are completely unrealistic, and to a certain degree they are. However, you can approach the issue as almost a forensic anthropologist. So weapons are usually governed by the laws of ergonomics. So impractical weapons to humans, us, might be completely practical and preferable to members of other species. So let's say an overbuilt, super thick sword that has to us a bad point of balance might be the most optimal item for another species. That means or implies that their joints work slightly different, their muscle strength is different, to the point that their neurological responses to pain and other stimuli are substantially different from humans and a product of a different evolutionary process. Imagine a continuous evolution of the Neanderthals, or Homo neanderthalensis. Instead of them being extinct or interbreeding with Homo sapiens, imagine they were isolated and placed into circumstances where they would evolve into dwarves. We know that Neanderthals had thicker bone structures than humans, probably pound for pound, they had more strength than human beings, and they were quite a bit shorter. So the kind of swords or items they would have come up with would have probably evolved in response to their anatomy. So essentially, maybe I'm making a Neanderthal sword.
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. I mean, you think about the small species of humanoids that they found on the island of Flores in Indonesia. Those were essentially hobbits that lived 50,000 years ago. Imagine if they were still around. What would their weapons have evolved like?
All right, so what we're doing right now, most of you might not know that the hammer can only punch downward. So we're creating a fuller using a series of top dies.
To give the blade width and start our cross section, I'm going to use the spring swage on the power hammer and basically forge out a rough fuller on the blade. The power hammer has flat dies, so it only compresses this way. Because the spring swage is semicircular, like this, it pushes the material sideways, creating width. Also, it sets us up for the depth in the middle of the fuller. And to achieve the final cross section, I'm going to wait and hand it over to Matt to set up my lines to go back into the hot forging.
So my job right now is to use the flat narrow wheel to turn this radius fuller and give it some angled edges. Those edges will allow us to catch it on a bottom tool and then use some top tools to go ahead and reforge the whole thing flat. I use the narrow wheel attachments on the grinder fairly often, but I rarely get to show you guys the value of the flat narrow wheel. In this case, I can really get in those corners, create a nice fine line, and it does the job a little better than a giant contact wheel.
At this point, we're using the lines that Matt ground in as a guide for the edge of the tooling. And at the end of this procedure, the semicircular fuller will turn into a complete flat fuller, where the lines become the corners of the cross section.
With every heat, with every blow, a blade takes shape, for friend or foe. Without a doubt, a plan in sight, the craftsman strikes with all his might. The edge takes shape, it's almost done. The war's not over, but this battle is nearly won.
Beard frost, I got a frosty beard. That's pretty nice. And in Mandragora, you get to fine tune your arsenal and pick from a bunch of different weapons and really build your character how you like. Much like we had a lot of choices on how we were gonna make this sword, you have a lot of choices on your loadout, your weaponry, and the way your character moves and looks. With the efforts put into forging the blade and the pieces, and it has a lot of battle damage in the actual game, I have to be careful when grinding that I don't actually grind through some of that desired texture, and since our ridges are pretty fine, if I grind my edge too far in, we're gonna lose a lot of that definition.
While Matt is busying himself grinding the blade, I went ahead and started on the garden pommel. In order to do that, I took a block of 1045 because that's the only large stock we have in the shop right now, and made a rectangular stock. Then I hot cut it into two sections, which will become a guard and pommel respectively. Our pommel, it has a spear-like shape, which is fantastic because it starts out with one of the most simple tricks on the power hammer, that is drawing a taper. After the taper is drawn, I leave some material in the middle and actually bunch it up because it will turn into those side-pointing wing doodads. That material that I isolated gets squashed to push further to the side, after which I will move to the anvil and give them their final shape.
With a sword like Beardfrost Blade, it's both weapon and a bit of sculpture. So we're going to be applying some different techniques that you might see in general blacksmithing to this sword to bring it to life.
I use a series of top tools, a swage block, and the anvil to manipulate the material and clean up the contour. With just some final bit of hot work, it's going to be ready to clean up on the grinder.
Years of research went into making these narrow wheel attachments available to the public. And here you can see I'm utilizing it once again to blend all the different complicated shapes on this pommel. I start off by using the narrow peak knife edge wheel, then I use a different Braubeck attachment to utilize the slack to clean the inside, and then I even use the rounded narrow wheel to make a very precise radius on the top side of those wings on the pommel. You can have them too. Just use the link in the description. Go to BraubeckIronworks.com and get yourself some narrow wheels. They'll change your life, I promise.
The second set of wings, or lower V-shaped thing that looks kind of like a guard, kind of like spokes on a spear, starts out as a piece of metal, and then I punch a hole in it. After the hole is punched, I move to the swage block and give it that characteristic angle. Remember, this thing has to slide up onto the foot of the pommel and be welded on. So I have to size all my tooling correctly to have the minimal amount of gappage possible. To make the guard, I have to start out with a very basic shape, because this basic shape is what will carry all the detail that you will see later. But right now, I have to size it and punch the hole for the tank. To create the cool fantasy designs that you will see on the guard, we're going to take a bunch of magnets and stick them on. No, we have actual blacksmiths, so what we're going to do, we're going to pre-bend our round rod so that it closely replicates the shape in the center of the guard, leaving the outsides clear. I'm then going to move to the welder and weld them on. The reason why I'm doing that is because I'm planning on finishing the rest of the forming hot in the forge.
I do want to give a quick shout out to the art department team with Mandragora. I mean, the hand-painted cutscenes alone are just such a nice touch, and it carries over into the actual gameplay where the background has so much depth and you can clearly see it was all hand-painted. Really like that. In a game like this, it's already immersive, but the art that goes into the game makes it so much better, and it kind of inspires you to do a little extra work and bringing something from the game to life.
After the overlays have been welded on, I move back to the forge and hot form them on the anvil.
In a sense, the textures of this piece are what really make it special. So, for instance, the blade, we have to make sure we have all the textures in place before heat treat, and then be careful to preserve them, not grind through them afterwards when we're actually polishing the blade. For the guard and the pommel, after things are welded on, we want to make it go back to the forged state. So anytime we had to grind or any place that we had to weld, we want to blend those welds out, then use things like Dremels, some other kind of forging to then induce those textures again. So we have the textured background and the polished front face of all of our pieces involved.
After all this work, it's finally time to heat treat our sword blade. For those of you that are new to our channel, heat treating basically takes place in two stages. One, getting it hot, quenching it in either oil or water, and then afterwards it'll be so hard and brittle that we'll have to place it back into the even heat kiln at around 425 degrees for a couple hours to then bring that hardness back to a toughness. So then we have a sword blade that not only is tough, but hard enough to hold a really good cutting edge. After the rapid cooling of the blade, warping can occur, so one of the things we always say is really great to do is to clamp it between two boards. In this case, we have some cardboard to conform to the shape, clamp it, let it sit until it cools, and then temper.
The grinding on this blade is pretty straightforward. The geometries are all there. Really all I'm doing is cleaning up what was done in the forging, making it more presentable, and getting it ready for its final detail.
I only have two main directives on this grind. One, keep the cutting edge nice and centered, and two, don't grab my bevel towards the center too far, otherwise we're going to lose that illusion of it being a thicker blade that we created in the forging.
The overall design of the Beard Frost blade is really cool actually. It's kind of like a dwarven short sword, has a little bit of a longer handle, and that's because the pommel and the handle are kind of all one piece. And to cut down on some of the weight in the handle so that that pommel is not solid steel, we're going to make the handle out of pipe, have it slip over the pommel, and it's really going to reduce some of that weight and make it a more usable item.
Now that all the components finally exist and are shaped to their final form, it's time to add the fine details.
Working side by side with Ilya all these years on big projects with crazy deadlines, we've just developed a systematic set of procedures of who does what when it matters most. We usually don't even have to talk to each other and decide who's doing what. We just kind of go, get the project done. And having that kind of trust in each other and in the process really shows in the end product. Guys, do me a favor and take a second and help support the sponsor that supported us in making this and other videos, and that is Mandragora, the new game Whispers of the Witch Tree. If you like classic side-scrolling gameplay with updated graphics, this one is for you. It's out on just about every platform, so use the link in our description, click it, and get to playing Mandragora today. Before you go, give this video a thumbs up and tell us in the comments below what build you'd like to see this team build next. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel.